But with the red, white, and blue, we can choose to hold on to our freedoms instead of giving them all to you. 'Cause with the red, white, and blue, we can choose to renew the principles of freedom and the stand.
Welcome, everyone, to the Daily Post Show. I'm Lance Earl, your host, and today we have a guest that I'm excited to have. He is a member of the Idaho State Legislature, and he is a member of the Idaho State Legislature that cares about principles of liberty, principles of the Constitution, and it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ron Nate. Ron.
Hi, Lance. Thank you for having me.
Hey, Ron, I'm really excited to have you here today with us. Ron, I know that there are certain things that you wanted to visit about and discuss, but before we jump into that, if I could, I would like to just take a minute and talk about something that's really new here in our state, and that, of course, is constitutional carry. I guess I'm curious to know where to from here. You know, I was in a meeting about a month ago, and the people there were saying, "Hey, we've arrived. We got everything we need. Now we can rest." I happen to not believe that, and I was just wondering, what do you think we're facing now as Idahoans regarding protecting and defending the Second Amendment? Or is it all completely safe now and secure, as those people said?
Well, that's a great question, Lance. It's true that the House Bill 1389 that we got passed last time was an important step in the right direction. We now have what we call permitless carry, where if you're 21 years of age or older, you can carry a gun without having to go through the step of getting a concealed carry permit. Interesting, before that, all of Idaho was open carry. 99.2% of Idaho was permitless carry. It was only the cities where you needed to have the permit. And so this bill cleared that up, cleared up a lot of confusion. But it also left some steps to still be taken. 18 to 21-year-olds are treated differently under this law. This law says if you're between 18 and 21, you need to go ahead and get a permit to conceal carry. It's interesting to me that we can send 19-year-olds to war, put an M16 in their hand, and have them go and face the enemy, but we feel like that back at home they need to have a permit to exercise their constitutional rights. The other gap left with this law was that it said that if you're not a resident of Idaho, you need to have a permit to conceal carry. Well, that's a little frustrating to me because Idaho is one of the United States. The United States Constitution is the one that mentions the right to protect ourselves, the right to keep and bear arms without government infringement. And so it seems odd to me that Idaho would make a distinction between Idaho residents and residents of other states that are equally part of our union. So I think that's another step we need to fix, is make it true permitless carry for U.S. citizens here in Idaho.
I would agree. Daniel Webster, he said that the Constitution was written to protect us against the dangers of good intentions. And I think that if we suffer from anything at the state level, at the federal level, right down to the city and county levels, it is the nonsense and dangers of good intentions. We think that we protect.
Milton Friedman, I'm an economics teacher by trade. And Milton Friedman said something similar. He said, there's nothing so dangerous, on this earth as good intentions. And I see it time and time again with economic policy, and also time and time again with just regular legislative policy. It's frustrating to me that in Idaho we have to pass a law for our right to be protected. We shouldn't have to pass laws to exercise constitutional rights.
No, we do that all the time. At the federal level, I see it all the time as well. It's nuts. We're going to pass a law that says we can exercise what the Constitution already says we can exercise. Hello?
Yeah, and the dangerous thing about that, Lance, is that it changes the perception of the public. Talk with school kids these days, and they are under the impression that rights come from government, but that's not where rights come from. They're natural God-given rights. The right, for example, the right to keep and bear arms is not granted by the U.S. Constitution in the Second Amendment. In fact, the right to keep and bear arms is mentioned only in passing to get to the main point: the government shall not infringe it. Government didn't create the right. The right was already ours.
Sure. And in fact, you look at all of our natural rights, and the Constitution simply affirms what was already there. It doesn't grant anything new, and it can't protect a thing. We have to do that as people. Well, anyway, that's go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say that's right. We get the government that we allow. It is up to the citizens to be vigilant. I think it's John Calhoun said that liberty is more easily obtained than it is preserved. And so it is up to the citizens keeping their legislators in check, saying, you know what, we don't need to keep passing laws. We need to reduce government, reduce waste, reduce regulations. That's what liberty is, and it requires vigilance from the citizenry.
Yeah, I would consider it an amazing victory if our next legislative session we actually repealed 3 laws for every one we passed. I just think that would be amazing, because there's so much that is too much that needs to go away.
That would be great.
Yeah. Now, anyway, thanks for indulging me on the Second Amendment, because you know that the Second Amendment is my thing. But now I'd like to turn some time over to you to talk about whatever it is you believe the people of Idaho need to hear from their representative. Stage is yours.
Okay, I think that there's 2 things, and if I forget the first one, remind me later. But one is the process of bills traveling through the legislature. The second one, and I'm going to start with the second one, is the appropriations process. I think Idaho, even though it's a Republican state and has a Republican-dominated legislature, it's far from conservative.
Yes.
We have a chairman of the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. That's the committee that sets the budgets and really outlines the spending the state does. She's been there 28 years. In fact, she's been there so long, she no longer refers to it as the state budget. She calls it her budget and her committee. And she is so entrenched in the spending that she votes against any tax cut that comes across the floor of the House because it threatens her budget.
Sure.
Idaho needs legislators who are going to scrutinize these budgets, to not just rubber stamp them. It is one of the most frustrating things for me as a freshman conservative legislator to see appropriations bills with wasteful spending in them come across the floor of the House, and without hardly blinking an eye, so-called good conservatives just rubber stamp them as yeses and say, well, we trust the committee on this. I can't trust a committee that takes $125 million of unexpected revenues last year and spends it up without even an inkling of giving it back to the taxpayers. And actually, not giving it back to the taxpayers. Returning the change. It's not government's money to give back. It's the taxpayers' money that they, I think, overspent simply because the economy was improving more than the legislature thought. And so that money does not rightly belong to the state or to the government. It belongs to the people. We ought to focus first on what is necessary government, fund that, and anything extra goes back to the taxpayer.
Okay.
The first one is also bills moving through the process.
Let's just park back on this appropriations for just a minute.
Okay, great.
Because I was just thinking of an interesting point. I was in the Army. I was a helicopter crew chief and door gunner, and every year we had to go through our gunnery qualifications, and so we would go out with the Cobras and the Mitchells and the chain guns, but we also did our door gunnery, machine guns out the side of Hueys. And one of the things that troubled me so bad, and when I share this story with people, their eyes get huge and they're shocked. and they really don't like this story, but it's minuscule compared to what you just shared, and I want to share that it is exactly the same thing. When we were done, when every Cobra pilot and gunner had done their work, when all the crew chiefs and door gunners had qualified, we always had cases and cases of M60 machine gun ammunition and missiles and different things that we hadn't used. And I think you probably know the rest of this story, Ron, but rather than turn it in and have our allotment lessened for next year because we didn't use it all, we would fly out over the range and kick it out the doors and just leave it out there. Now, in the grand scheme of government spending, this is nothing. It's a drop. It's a pittance. But when people look at it in that light, they would say, that's horrible. And what I heard you say about our state government is they're always making sure that they get at least as much, if not more, only to waste. Isn't it precisely the same thing, Ron?
It is precisely the same thing. Government waste is the same whether it happens on the ground level with the bureaucracies and agencies not being responsible. In fact, I've been reading a book recently that talks about it as being theft.
Sure it is.
The stealing of America. And it is stealing if you're a government official and you know money is being wasted and you do nothing about it, you are an accomplice in that theft of the taxpayer, because that money didn't come voluntarily. It came through the authority and the force of government.
Sure.
And so we have a responsibility to make sure that the spending is only what's necessary.
Good. Okay, thanks. Now I'll let you move on.
Okay. The other issue is about bills moving through the legislature. I've had examples of a lot of bills that have been brought to me by citizens, ideas saying, look, we need to look at this issue or this issue or this issue, whether it's keeping legislators and public officials accountable in terms of gift giving or repealing parts of Common Core or repealing all of the Obamacare in Idaho. These are good ideas coming from citizens. Legislators have worked hard in drafting up bills that are sound and good bills for Idaho, only to find out that the governor apparently is not the only one in the state exercising veto power.
Really?
We have leadership in the House, leadership in the Senate. We have all the committee chairs who have taken it upon themselves to be the gateway, the vetoers in charge, that they get to determine what a good bill is and what isn't. We're called representatives for a reason. We're supposed to be voting on bills and represent our citizens' interests. We're supposed to be bringing our citizens' ideas and representing those. For committee chairs and leadership to put those bills in a drawer and not let them get heard disenfranchises those representatives' voters. And I've about had it with it. I'm ready to exercise rules of the House and whatever else is necessary to bring that to light and make it clear that we are supposed to represent our voters' interests.
Sure. Well, that's almost a pre-veto, isn't it? That's a veto even before the bill is heard or argued or spoken, questioned or anything.
Oh yeah, and the motives behind it are even worse. I hear things are told to me like, well, the governor's not supportive of that, and so we don't want to make the governor look bad. Well, when was it the job of the House of Representatives to make the governor look good? That is not our job. Our job is to represent. Other reasons are, well, we're not sure if there's support in the Senate. We're not going to make people cast a vote in the House if we're not sure it's going to pass the Senate. Well, our job is not to protect people from awkward votes either. We're there to vote. And we vote up or down on bills. That's what we're supposed to do. I don't need protection of leadership. The Senate doesn't need our protection from the House or vice versa. We need to be voting on these good ideas that citizens bring to us.
Well, yeah. In fact, I remember not this last session, but the session prior, we had the permitless carry bill stuffed in a drawer, blocked by a committee chair, and we couldn't get it out. The problem that year was that the bill was never heard, never spoken of, never brought before the people or the legislature. And that's very frustrating. Yeah. I'm sure it's frustrating to you as well because you see it more than I do, I'm sure.
Sure. And a little secret about the gun bill this year is it never would have been written, never would have been heard or passed had it not been for myself and Representative Scott from up north writing 2 permitless carry bills, submitting those as personal bills, and then having citizens call and let their legislators know that we need to pass permitless carry. The leadership scrambled, tried to put together their own bill, and which was essentially the same as one of our bills, except they added a few more restrictions, like the 18 to 21-year-olds. But then they pat themselves on the back by saying, oh, we've been working on this for 3 years. Simply not true. They scrambled in January and finally got something together by March. And it's deceit and trickery, and it's just dishonest.
Well, I was talking with Greg Pruitt. For those of you that don't know, Greg Pruitt is the president of the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance, and Greg has been key in this fight. But I was talking to him, and I thought, and I asked him, it's interesting to me. I said, Heather Scott submitted a bill, Ron Nate submitted a bill. Now, both of their bills got buried, but at the same time, the people stood up. We had rallies, the likes of which haven't been seen, at least on this topic before. And I think what happened, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think what happened is the powers that be in the legislature said, oh, okay, there's enough noise out there among the people that we have no choice. We've got to move forward. Therefore, we will write it so that we can take the credit. I was a little bit frustrated that it wasn't your bill or Heather's bill that was moved forward.
Yeah, it was amazing to me. And from their perspective, too, they absolutely had to have the NRA involved in it. And because the NRA was involved in it, I think we got less than a perfect permitless carry bill because they did put in those extra restrictions. It seems to me the NRA always leaves a little more work to be done, maybe as a means of job security.
Yeah, I don't know. I do know that in the previous year the NRA was a big challenge, and I had many conversations with what's his name, Dakota, the lobbyist from the NRA, I think, Dakota Meyer or
Dakota
something.
Moore.
Dakota Moore. Yeah, I had some very interesting and unsatisfactory discussions with him. So, yeah, I think that their hands are always in there. I've noticed that they always, it seems, do something to guarantee that we have to continue offering their courses, which is, of course, a revenue builder for them.
Well, anyway, the whole experience was a case in point that when the citizens rise up, when the citizens contact our legislators and leadership, that something happens. It may not happen immediately, but this year was a perfect storm. There had been enough heat put on them in the past, and this election year they did not want controversy.
Sure.
So they scrambled and got something together rather than have to face the music in May.
Well, I'm glad they did. I'm glad that we came together as our legislators, as our citizens. Together we have power. Individually we don't. And that's the thing we need to understand is, there are too many people that would send you to Boise and say, fix it, Ron. It's not going to happen. You can't do it by yourself. It takes all of us standing together. And it was good to see it work this year.
It really was, yes.
Yeah. Okay, Ron, well, we got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Is there anything else that you would like to throw out to the people before we go?
Yeah, I think there are some freedom issues that we still need to work on. We need to get our lands back from the federal government. And
Yes.
That's an issue that's been ongoing. And I think it's really an unfair situation if you look at the equal footing doctrine in the Constitution to have 35 states where the federal government controls 2% or less of their lands. But then these western states, like Idaho, have the federal government control 63% of our lands.
And
our
up
lands
to
are
80%.
resource-rich.
80% of Nevada. It's insane what they're doing.
So it's over the top. And, I know it's a different issue, but if you look at the Supreme Court's decision on the Affordable Care Act, Justice Roberts wrote something in there very interesting. He said, if states want to be the sovereigns they claim they are, they need to stand up and start acting like it. And the lands issue is one area where we can stand up and start acting like it. We don't have to go begging to the federal government for permission. Let's stand up and operate like it's our lands. Let's work on that and then see what the federal government does. You know, it's not right for the federal government to treat states differently.
No, it's not. It's not. I can tell you that as I talk to people, there is one concern, and it's my concern a little bit too. And I don't know if it's been addressed yet, but we see some states. Texas comes to mind. They've sold everything, and now if you want to hunt a deer, you have to go pay a private landowner this huge amount of money to get on there and hunt or fish or whatever. Is there work in place to make sure that the lands don't just get sold off, that they do remain under state control and accessible by the people? That, I think, is the biggest concern I've heard.
Absolutely. And the main point here isn't that we want to sell off all the lands and have cabins all over the state. It's that Idaho is a better steward of its own lands than the federal government is. Idaho can better decide what to do best with its natural resources, whether to develop some, preserve some as wilderness, preserve some, for resource use. Idaho's better at making those decisions. We've seen the tragedy that happens when the federal government from Washington, D.C. tries to decide something as simple as wolf management. The western states are more in touch with their lands and their issues than the federal government ever will be. And Idaho is probably better at striking that balance than the federal government is.
Good. Well, as long as we keep that in mind, because I have heard a couple legislators say we can just start selling it. We can pay our debt. We can fund our education. But that only works for a while, because pretty soon we will run out of Idaho. It'll all be private.
That's right. And House Bill 582 last year really set the stage, saying that, we are going to be prepared for when land is returned to Idaho. We're putting the parameters on for what Idaho can and intends to do with the land.
Okay. Well, you're right. It needs to be as close to the people as possible. I looked recently at that video that LaVoy Finicum shot in his pasture just before his death, where he was out on land that he had bought and paid for, that had never belonged to the federal government. Before him, it belonged to another family, and before them, it belonged to the homesteaders. And he knew when it was right to put cattle on. He knew when the water was there and when the grass was there, and the federal government told him he couldn't. You're right. You're right. We put this. As much as possible, we put this in the hands of the states and the counties, and even right down to the people, because that's where it belongs. Hey, Ron, I appreciate you being here with us today.
All right.
And I want you to know that I appreciate you as a legislator, even when we butt heads once in a while. I've not lost sight of what you're doing up there. So thank you for being with us.
I haven't found anyone that I agree with 100% yet, but I find there's a growing group of us there in Boise that we agree in the high 90%, and it's a pleasure to work with other liberty-minded folks that respect and honor the Constitution and are true conservatives in terms of taxes and regulations and limiting government growth. I'm looking forward to another 2 years.
Good. Hey, Ron, thanks for being with us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Lance. I appreciate the call or the time with you today.
You betcha. Okay, I'm Lance Earl. I'll see you soon.